The sharp, piercing shriek of a dozen medical alarms tears through the sterile air of the penthouse infirmary. Red lights pulse against the stark white walls, painting the scene in a frantic, desperate rhythm. Elias Thorne, the tech billionaire whose face graces magazine covers and whose name is synonymous with innovation, crumples to the floor. The impact is a dull, heavy thud, a stark contrast to the cacophony of the machines now screaming for his life. A team of the world's best doctors, flown in on a private jet just for this checkup, freezes in place. Their collective expertise, worth millions, is suddenly useless. They are statues of shock and confusion. On the monitors, Thorne's heart rhythm stutters. A chaotic dance of spikes and flatlines. A horrifying gray pallor spreads across his skin, leaching the life and color from his face like a fast-acting poison. In the corner of the room, almost invisible against the backdrop of gleaming equipment, Jack, the night janitor, drops his mop. The clatter is lost in the rising tide of panic. But Jack isn't looking at the chaos. He's looking at the details. Everyone else is missing. He sees Elias Thorne's fingers, twitching uncontrollably on the polished marble floor. It's a small, almost insignificant detail, a macabre dance of nerves firing without command. And in that small twitch, Jack sees everything. He knows, with a certainty that chills him to the bone, this isn't a heart attack. This isn't a stroke or some sudden, tragic cardiac event. This is Neurox poisoning. He recognizes the signature tremor, the rapid discoloration, the specific way the body convulses as the neurotoxin seizes control. He remembers seeing it once before, a lifetime ago, in a dimly lit, makeshift clinic outside a factory in Jakarta. An image seared into his memory, a ghost from a past he thought he'd left behind. His military training, buried deep beneath years of mopping floors and emptying trash cans, screams at him. It's a primal, instinctual roar in the back of his mind. Antidote. Now, the window is closing. Every second that ticks by, the poison burns deeper, cementing its hold, making recovery less and less likely. But as he looks up, he sees the doctors. They're finally moving, but it's a flurry of the wrong kind of activity. They're grabbing defibrillator paddles, prepping adrenaline shot standard procedure for cardiac arrest. They're treating the symptoms, not the cause. They see a heart failing. Jack sees a system being systematically dismantled by a chemical weapon. He takes a half step forward, his worn-out work boots squeaking on the pristine floor. He wants to shout, to tell them they're wrong, to tell them what they really need is a specific chelating agent, one that's probably locked away in some obscure corner of Thorne's advanced medical stores. But they don't see him. Or rather, they see him, but they don't see him. They see a janitor, a man with a mop and a bucket, someone who belongs in the background. They see a blue collar, not a former special forces medic with first-hand experience in exotic toxins. To them, he is an obstacle, a piece of the furniture that's suddenly out of place. He's not a savior. He's just the help. Time is a predator in the room. The rhythmic beeping of the machines grows more erratic, more desperate. A thin trickle of blood appears at the corner of Thorne's mouth, a dark red line against his ashen skin. The doctors are about to shock him, a move that will do nothing but stress a body already at its breaking point. They are about to kill Elias Thorne with their kindness, with their best intentions and their textbook knowledge. Jack knows he has to act. He can't stand by and watch this happen. He lets the mop handle fall completely, the wood clattering loudly this time, a sound of decision. He steps forward, out of the shadows and into the frantic glare of the red emergency lights. He raises his hands slowly, a gesture of peace, but his eyes are filled with an urgency that could stop a charging bull. He needs to get their attention, to break through their panic and their professional pride. He needs to make them listen to the janitor. This isn't about cleaning up a spill anymore. This is a mess of a different kind entirely. This is a race against death itself. And right now, in this room full of brilliant minds, the most unlikely hero in the world is the only one who holds the cure. His past is about to collide with his present in the most explosive way imaginable. And for Elias Thorne, everything depends on whether they will listen. Alarms screamed through the sterile white corridors, a relentless, high-pitched wail that echoed the chaos unfolding. Red light strobed across the scene, painting everything in frantic flashes of crimson. On the cold, unforgiving floor lay Thorne, a man whose life was now being measured in seconds. His body was a still life in a storm of medical urgency. Dr. Lena knelt beside him, a penlight cutting a sharp beam into his eye. His pupils were fixed, dilated, a terrifying sign that the window of opportunity was slamming shut. The monitor above shrieked a new warning. Oxygen saturation was plummeting. 85%. 80-75. Dr. Eris, his face a mask of grim determination, barked orders like a battlefield commander. His voice sliced through the cacophony. He's crashing. Intubate him, now. The medical team exploded into action, a whirlwind of blue scrubs and focused panic. A respiratory therapist rushed forward with a laryngoscope. Stethoscopes flew like choreographed weapons, and IV lines were checked and rechecked. It was a symphony of life-saving. every note precise, every movement practiced. Yet amidst this frantic ballet, one figure stood completely still. Jack, his mop, just moments ago, his only concern, was slowly slipping from his numb fingers, the handle clattering softly against the polished floor, a sound no one heard. He watched, frozen, as Thorne's skin began to take on a ghostly, ashen gray hue, a deathly pallor that seemed to absorb the flashing red light. Then, he saw it, a subtle movement that sent a jolt of ice through his veins. Thorne's fingers, which had been limp, began to twitch. They clawed at the empty air, a desperate, silent plea from a body betraying itself. Jack's eyes locked onto that tremor, that tiny, convulsive dance of the dying. And suddenly, he wasn't in a state-of-the-art hospital anymore. The sterile smell of antiseptic was gone, replaced by the stinging grit of sand. The whine of the alarms became the howl of a desert wind. Kandahar. The memory hit him with the force of a physical blow. He was back in the suffocating heat, the sun a merciless eye in the sky, a sandstorm whipping around him. He saw another man, a brother in arms, lying on the cracked earth, his body racked by the exact same convulsions. The same horrifying twitching, the same rattling gasp for air that was no longer there. A ghost from his past, replaying its final moments right before his eyes. He knew this death. He had held it in his hands before. A single word escaped his lips, a barely audible whisper, lost in the medical storm. Neurox, the toxin. A rare fast-acting nerve agent he'd only encountered once, with devastating consequences. He knew its signature, the terrifying ballet of a nervous system shutting down. Dr. Eris, in his haste to push a crash cart closer, shoved past Jack without a second glance. Not now, janitor, he snarled, his focus entirely on the dying man and the failing reader. The dismissive words barely registered, but Jack felt his knuckles whiten as he gripped the mop handle. 90 seconds. The monitor blared its next grim prediction. 90 seconds until irreversible cardiac arrest. He had to say something. He took a hesitant step forward, into the circle of controlled chaos. "Sir," he said, his voice stronger than he expected. Dr. Eris turned, his eyes blazing with a mix of fury and disbelief. "I said, get out. One more word, and you're fired." The threat hung in the air, a wall between them. Jack retreated, stepping back into the shadows of the hallway. But he couldn't leave. He watched as the team prepared a syringe, a clear liquid being drawn up with practiced efficiency. Epinephrine. They were going to flood his system with it. Jack's heart hammered against his ribs. He watched Thorne's chest heave with the forced breaths from the ambu bag. But it was the twitching hand that told him everything. It was the telltale sign. The convulsions were the key. Epinephrine would be like pouring gasoline on a fire. The stimulants would accelerate the toxin's attack, frying his neural pathways and sending him into a seizure he would never come back from. They were killing him. They were killing him with the very thing they thought would save him. Neurox doesn't need stimulants. It needs an antidote. It needs atropine and pralidoxamine, and it needs it now. Time was evaporating. Each flash of the red light was a tick of the clock counting down Thorne's life. Jack's boots felt rooted to the floor, heavy as lead. He was just the janitor. Invisible, unimportant. But his mind was racing, tearing through protocols and memories he thought he had buried long ago. There was one dose. He knew exactly where it was, tucked away in the back of his locker, a personal emergency kit he'd kept with him since the day he left the service. A relic from a past life, a just-in-case that had now become the only case that mattered. He looked at the medical team, a wall of expertise and authority. They were about to seal Thorne's fate, confident in their diagnosis, blind to the truth that was convulsing right in front of them. He could walk away, keep his job, keep his quiet life, and let them make their fatal mistake. Or he could risk everything. His job, his anonymity, maybe even his freedom. One dose. One chance to save a life. One chance to defy the ghosts of Kandahar. He looked from the twitching hand on the floor to the determined faces of the doctors, and knew he couldn't just stand there and watch it happen again. The janitor was about to break all the rules. The hallway was a tunnel of steel and silence, each footstep an explosion in Jack's ears. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the cold fear. Lockers stood like sentinels, silent and imposing. His fingers, trembling slightly, traced the cold metal until they found it the almost invisible seam of the hidden compartment. With a soft click, it opened. Inside, nestled in the darkness, the antidote pulsed with a soft, ethereal blue light. It was hope, solidified into a fragile glass vial. Downstairs, the world was collapsing. In the sterile white of the emergency room, the rhythmic hiss of Thorne's oxygen supply faltered, then crashed into a terrifying silence. The monitors shrieked in protest, their jagged lines plummeting. "He's crashing." Dr. Arisa's voice was sharp, cutting through the rising panic. He snatched an epinephrine syringe from a tray, the needle glinting under the harsh surgical lights. "Lena, hold him steady." Lena, her face pale, hesitated. Her hands hovered over Thorne, her eyes wide with fear. Meanwhile, Jack was a blur of motion. He sprinted through the corridors, a ghost in white. Supply carts became obstacles to be dodged, their wheels squealing in his wake. A stethoscope, forgotten, swung wildly from his neck like a pendulum counting down the final seconds. He didn't feel the burn in his lungs or the ache in his legs. There was only one thought, one mission: get the antidote to Thorn. He burst back into the emergency room, the chaos hitting him like a physical blow. The scene was worse than he'd imagined. Thorn's lips were a deathly shade of blue, his chest still stopped. Jack's voice was a raw shout, tearing through the din of alarms and frantic voices. Dr. Eris whirled around, surprise and anger flashing in his eyes. The epinephrine syringe was raised, poised like a weapon. "You again," Eris snarled, his voice dripping with contempt. "I'll have security remove you from this hospital permanently." But Jack wasn't listening. He shoved past the medical team, a desperate, unstoppable force. The blue vial in his hand seemed to pulse with its own life. A beacon in the dimming room. One injection. There was only one injection left. He didn't hesitate. He plunged the needle deep into Thorn's arm, the liquid a vibrant blue against the pale skin. The reaction was immediate and violent. Dr. Eris, enraged, tackled Jack with the force of a linebacker. They crashed against a bank of monitors, a symphony of destruction. Screens shattered, sending a shower of sparks into the air. The delicate electronics popped and fizzled. And then, the most dreadful sound of all, the long, unbroken tone of a flatline. Silence fell over the room, thick and suffocating. The alarms ceased their frantic chorus, leaving only the chilling monotone of death. Jack lay on the floor, pinned beneath Dr. Eris's weight, the wind knocked out of him. His eyes found the source of a faint dripping sound. The antidote, his last hope, was seeping from the broken vial, forming a useless, shimmering puddle on the cold linoleum. He looked at Thorn's chest, still and unmoving. A faint pulse flickered on a surviving monitor, a single, hopeful blip, and then it was gone. The line went flat again. "Too late," Jack whispered, the words a hollow breath of despair. It was over. He had failed. His gaze drifted to Thorn's hand, resting limply at his side. The frantic, involuntary twitching that had seized Thorn's body had stopped, but as Jack watched, something impossible happened. The hand, once cold and waxy, slowly, miraculously, began to turn warm. A flush of color, like the first light of dawn, crept back into the skin. Dr. Eris froze, his weight still pressing Jack into the floor. He stared, disbelieving. Lena let out a choked gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. And then, a sound that cut through the silence, cleaner and more beautiful than any symphony. Beep. A single, steady beat from the monitors. Then another. Beep, beep, steady, strong, alive. Thorn was alive. The antidote had worked. In the wreckage of the room, amidst the shattered glass and shattered certainty, a miracle had taken root. The steady rhythmic beat was the sound of a life reclaimed from the very edge of oblivion. Dr. Eris's eyes were glued to the monitors, a frantic dance of green lines across the screens. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Thorn's pulse, which had been a frantic, erratic beat just moments ago, was now steady, strong, a rhythmic drum against the backdrop of medical beeps. It was impossible. He'd seen the poison take hold, seen the life drain from the man's face. What had just happened? He turned, his mind racing, and saw the source of the miracle. Jack, the janitor, was still standing there, a broken syringe clutched in his hand. The shattered plastic glinted under the harsh operating room lights. Without thinking, Eris lunged forward and ripped the broken syringe from Jack's grasp, his fingers trembling with a mix of shock and confusion. He had to analyze this, had to understand. Just then, two security guards burst into the room, their faces grim. They moved with practiced efficiency, grabbing Jack's arms and pinning him against the wall. They'd seen the struggle, the syringe, and drawn the most obvious conclusion: an attack. Jack didn't resist, his face a mask of exhaustion and something else: resolve. But before anyone could say a word, a soft groan filled the room. All eyes snapped back to the hospital bed. Thorn's eyes, which had been closed in a death-like stillness, began to flutter open. The room held its collective breath. He blinked, slowly, his gaze unfocused as he took in the scene. Then, with a monumental effort, he raised a trembling finger, his hand shaking uncontrollably. He pointed it directly at Jack. "Stop," he managed to say. His voice was a dry, ragged rasp, barely a whisper, but it carried the undeniable weight of command. Instantly, the security guards froze, their hands still gripping Jack's arms, but their movements halted. They looked from Thorn to their captive, confusion etched on their faces. Thorn's gaze, now clearing, locked onto Jack's. The intensity in his eyes burned through the haze of the dregs. "You," he rasped, his voice gaining a fraction more strength. "You saved me." The words hung in the air, a stunning pronouncement that defied all logic. Dr. Eris stared, dumbfounded. He let the broken syringe fall from his numb fingers. It clattered onto the sterile tile floor, the sound echoing in the sudden, profound silence. Across the room, Lena, one of the lead nurses, instinctively moved to Thorne's side, her professional training kicking in. She started checking his vitals, her eyes widening as she read the displays. "His color is returning," she announced, her voice filled with disbelief. "Oxygen levels are stabilizing. Heart rate is normal." She looked from the monitors to Jack. How? The question everyone was thinking. All heads turned to the janitor, who was still held by security. Jack finally met Thorne's gaze. There was no fear in his eyes, only a quiet understanding that passed between the two men. "Kandahar, sir," Jack said, his voice low and steady. The words seemed to hold a world of meaning. "Neurox toxin. We were trained on the antidote." A flicker of recognition crossed Thorne's face. His hand, no longer trembling so violently, reached out and closed around Jack's wrist. The grip was weak, but astonishingly firm. It was a connection, a bond, forged in that single moment. "You served with my son," Thorne stated, his voice raspy with emotion. "Captain Miller." The name hit Jack like a physical blow. His breath hitched in his throat, and for the first time, his composure cracked. "Miller," he repeated, the name a ghost on his lips. Thorne's eyes, the eyes of a powerful man who had just stared into the abyss, filled with tears. They traced the lines on Jack's face, searching for a memory, a connection to the son he had lost. "He didn't make it," Thorne whispered, his voice thick with a grief that time had not healed. Jack's own voice broke as the memories flooded back, raw and painful. "I carried him out, sir," he said, the words choked with emotion. He had carried the captain's body from the field of battle, a promise made and kept under a hail of gunfire. Thorne pulled Jack closer, his grip on Jack's wrist tightening. It wasn't the pull of a powerful executive, but the desperate grasp of a grieving father. He brought Jack's hand to his chest, holding it there. "Thank you," he breathed, the words imbued with years of unspoken pain and gratitude, for bringing his son home, for saving his own life. The monitors continued their steady rhythmic beeping, a soundtrack to the silent, emotionally charged scene. The sound was no longer an alarm, but a lullaby, a confirmation of life reclaimed. Dr. Aris slowly stepped back, running a hand through his hair, his scientific mind struggling to process the human drama that had just unfolded. The rest of the medical team watched, silent and respectful. In that room, silence spoke louder than any medical chart or diagnosis ever could. A shared history, a battlefield promise, a father's grief, all converged in this sterile white room. Jack stood there, a janitor in a worn-out uniform, now the center of a world he had only ever cleaned. After a long moment, Thorne's hand fell away from his wrist, the physical connection broken, but the invisible one remained. His eyes, however, stayed locked on Jack, clear and sharp with newfound purpose. "This isn't over," Thorne whispered, his voice gaining the familiar steel of command. "You're coming with me." It wasn't a request, it was a declaration. A new chapter was beginning. Jack simply nodded, a silent acceptance of his new reality. His old life was over. On the floor, forgotten amidst the drama and revelation, lay the mop and bucket. Symbols of a life left behind on the sterile white floor. The grip on my wrist was like iron. Thorne, the man who owned this whole damn building, was pulling me into his private hospital room. Sterile white walls seemed to close in around us. Dr. Aris rushed forward, his face a mask of concern. "Sir, you need to rest. Your vitals are unstable." Thorne's voice, though weak, cut through the air like steel. "Leave us." The medical team exchanged uneasy glances but obeyed, their footsteps retreating down the hall until the door clicked shut, sealing us in silence. Thorne struggled to sit up, a sharp wince of pain flashing across his features. He fixed his gaze on me. He recognized the toxin, Jack. It wasn't a question. That wasn't an accident. I was poisoned. My eyes narrowed. He was right. I'd seen the signs, the subtle tells that screamed something far more sinister than a simple collapse. "How do you know?" I asked, my voice low. "Neurox 7, he rasped. "It's military grade, extremely rare." A dry, weak cough shook his frame, followed by a humorless smile. "My company manufactures it." The room suddenly felt colder. Someone tried to silence me. I took a step back, the sterile floor cold beneath my worn shoes. The implications were staggering. "Why are you telling me this? I'm just a cleaner." His eyes, burning with a feverish intensity, held mine. "Because Miller trusted you. He said you were the best he ever served with." The name hit me like a physical blow. "Miller, my old commander. And right now," Thorne continued, his voice strained, "I need your skills more than ever." The heart monitor beside his bed began to beep faster, in frantic rhythm in the tense silence. "They'll come for me again," he said, his gaze darting towards the door. "They'll try to finish the job." At the gala tonight, the annual Thorne Industries Gala, the biggest event of the year, happening just a few floors below us, I shook my head, trying to distance myself from the spiraling conspiracy. "Sir, with all due respect, I clean floors. I am not who you think I am." But he wasn't listening. He grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong despite his condition. His next words stopped my world from turning. "They killed my son, Jack." The raw agony in his voice was undeniable. The official report said it was a training accident. A lie. He took a ragged breath. They found Neurox 7 in his bloodstream, the same poison that's in me. I froze, my mind racing back, trying to connect the dots. Miller's son, dead Miller's son. He didn't die in combat. Thorne shook his head slowly, and I saw tears cutting clean tracks through the grime and sweat on his face. No, murdered. Through his V4th line, just like they tried with me. He looked at me, his eyes pleading, desperate. You're the only one who can prove it. The only one who can get past their security. Miller told me stories about you. He said you could disappear in plain sight. The gala, he explained, was the perfect cover. The CEO who orchestrated the murder would be there, feeling untouchable. He had a data chip, hidden in his office, containing all the proof. Shipping manifests, illegal sales, communications, everything needed to expose the truth and avenge his son. The gala starts in 3 hours. Thorne rasped, his hand suddenly going slack on my arm. His head fell back against the pillow, his vitals crashing on the monitor beside him. The steady beeping turned into a high-pitched, continuous alarm. I didn't hesitate. I slammed the red call button on the wall. Dr. Eris and his team burst back into the room, their faces a mixture of panic and accusation. What did you do? Eris shouted over the screaming alarms. I pointed a shaking finger at the IV bag. It's not the Neurox, I said, my voice steady, despite the chaos. Look at the drip rate. Someone rigged it. It's a sedative overdose. He's crashing again. The room became a blur of motion. Nurses and doctors swarmed around the bed, shouting medical jargon, preparing a defibrillator. Alarms blared, a symphony of crisis. Through it all, Thorne's eyes found mine. They were fading, but the fire was still there. A final, desperate plea. One last time, his gaze locked on me, his lips barely forming the words. A silent message only I could understand. Save me, soldier, or we both die tonight. The choice wasn't a choice at all. It was a command from a dying man, a debt to a fallen friend. My life as a janitor was over. Tonight, I was going back to war. My mission was clear. Get that chip, expose the truth, and make them pay. The gala was my battlefield, and the clock was ticking. I slipped out of the room as the first shock was delivered, melting back into the shadows of the hospital corridors. The hunt had begun. The alarms were a symphony of screams, a piercing, relentless shriek that cut through the sterile air of the VIP recovery suite. Each blare was a hammer blow against my skull, but it was nothing compared to the sound that ripped through my soul. The flat, unending drone from Thorne's heart monitor flatline. The word echoed in the sudden, terrifying silence that followed the initial chaos. Dr. Eris, his face, a mask of grim determination, shoved me aside with a force I hadn't expected. Get back, he barked, his voice raw with urgency. I need room. He was already working, his hands a blur of practiced motion, tilting Thorne's head back, clearing the airway, trying to force life back into a body that had already surrendered. Lena, the younger of the two nurses, was right there with him, her movements just as swift, her face pale but focused. Charging, she announced, her voice tight. The defibrillator pads whined as they powered up. Clear, Eris yelled, and everyone instinctively Thorne's body jolted on the bed, a grotesque, involuntary dance. We watched the monitor, our breaths held captive in our chests. Nothing, the straight line remained, mocking our efforts. Again, Eris commanded. Again, the charge, the warning, the violent spasm. And again, nothing. Thorne was gone. My mind raced, a chaotic storm of panic and disbelief. This couldn't be happening. Not now. Not after everything we'd been through. My eyes darted around the room, searching for an answer, a reason, anything. They landed on the IV stand next to the bed. The sedative drip, it was supposed to be keeping the last remnants of the Neurox poison dormant, a fragile truce in a war we were barely winning. I followed the clear tube down from the bag to the drip chamber, and then I saw it. A hairline fracture, a tiny spiderweb of cracks across the plastic. And the chamber, it was empty. Not slowly dripping, but bone dry. The sedative hadn't been administered. It had been leaking, uselessly, onto the floor. He hadn't just crashed. He'd been starved of the only thing keeping him alive. A surge of pure adrenaline, cold and sharp, shot through me. I ripped the compromised foreline from his arm without a second thought. Thorne's veins, already darkening, began to bulge against his skin, turning a horrifying, inky black. The Neurox was back, and it was waging an all-out war, a full-blown resurgence. The antidote, I roared, my voice sounding foreign and distant even to my own ears. I didn't wait for a response. I sprinted across the room to the locked wall cabinet, the one containing the emergency countermeasures. My fist connected with the glass panel, shattering it into 1,000 tiny pieces. I ignored the stinging pain in my knuckles as I reached inside and grabbed the small, unassuming vial filled with a brilliant blue liquid. The last dose. Our final hope. As I turned, a figure blocked my path. It was Dr. Eris, his eyes blazing with a righteous fury. What are you doing? He demanded, planting himself between me and the bed. You can't. Look at him. He's gone. You'll just be desecrating a body." His voice dropped, thick with accusation. "You almost killed him once with your reckless schemes. Jack, I won't let you do it again." He saw me as the cause, the trigger for this catastrophe. In his mind, I was the villain. But there was no time for debate. No time for persuasion. There was only the flatline, the black veins, the ticking clock that had already run out. I didn't hesitate. I drove my elbow hard into Arisa's jaw. It was a sharp, brutal movement, born of pure desperation. He staggered back, a look of shocked surprise on his face as he crumpled to the floor. The antidote vial, knocked from my grip, tumbled through the air. Time seemed to slow down. I lunged, my fingers stretching, and caught it just inches from the hard tile floor. My heart hammered against my ribs as I spun back toward the bed. Thorne's body was arching violently, a horrifying, silent scream of agony. His lips, already tinged blue from lack of oxygen, were now bleeding where he'd bitten them. I scrambled onto the bed, straddling his convulsing frame, trying to pin him down. There was no time to find a vein in his arm. It had to be now. With a steady hand I didn't know I possessed, I plunged the needle directly into the side of his neck, into the thick carotid artery. I depressed the plunger, sending the vibrant blue liquid flooding into his system, a direct assault on the poison ravaging him. I held the needle steady, my eyes locked on the syringe, my mind a frantic metronome, counting down the seconds. 10. My own breath hitched in my throat. 9. Thorne's fingers, which had been limp, suddenly clawed at the bedsheets, tearing at the fabric with inhuman strength. 8. A guttural, gurgling sound escaped his throat, a noise that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. 7. I could feel the violent tremors beneath me begin to subside, just slightly. 6. Was I imagining it, or was the terrifying blackness in his veins starting to recede? 5. A flicker of color, a faint blush, began to creep back into his cheeks, spreading like a rising tide against the gray pallor of death. 4. The arch in his back relaxed, and his body settled back onto the mattress. 3. His eyes, which had been rolled back in his head, snapped open. They were wide, unfocused, but they were open. 2. A collective gasp filled the room. 1. And then, silence. The agonizing continuous drone of the flat line ceased. In its place, a single, steady beat, and another, a rhythm, a pulse. Slow, but strong and unwavering. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I stared at the monitor, unable to believe it. It was real. He was back. The tension in the room snapped. Lena dropped the defibrillator pads with a clatter that echoed in the sudden quiet. Dr. Eris, holding a hand to his bleeding lip, stared from Thorne to me, his expression a mixture of awe and disbelief. The fight drained out of me all at once. My muscles turned to water, and I collapsed from the bed to my knees. The empty antidote vial slipping from my nerveless fingers and rolling across the floor. I just knelt there, head bowed, gasping for air, trying to process the miracle I had just witnessed. A weak, raspy whisper cut through the silence. "Jack." I looked up. Thorne was looking at me, his eyes clear and lucid. He was weak, but he was alive. He struggled to speak again, his voice barely audible. "They're here." Before I could even process what he meant, the door to the suite burst open with explosive force. It slammed against the wall, and the room was instantly filled with figures. Men in immaculate black suits, their faces grim and professional. They moved with a chilling efficiency, fanning out, securing the room. Each one of them held a gun, drawn and pointed with unnerving steadiness. From behind them, a man stepped forward. He wasn't in a suit. He wore a crisp military uniform, and the cold, cruel smile on his face was one I knew all too well. It was a smile that had haunted my past, a ghost I thought I had long since buried. Colonel Vance, my old commanding officer, my most bitter enemy, the security chief for Thorne's entire operation. He walked calmly toward me, his polished boots clicking on the tile. His smile widened as he looked from me, kneeling on the floor, to Thorne, alive in the bed, and then back again. "Welcome back, soldier," Vance said, his voice dripping with mock cordiality. The cold hard steel of a gun barrel pressed against my temple. "It looks," he mused, "like the gala just got interesting." The party was far from over. In fact, it was just the cold steel of Vance's gun dug into my skull, a brutal punctuation mark to a friendship I thought was forged in fire. Colonel Marcus Vance, my old commander, the man who'd taught me everything about loyalty, now teaching me the smell of betrayal. It smelled like gun oil and expensive cologne. "You look tired, soldier." Vance's voice dripped with a mockery that stung worse than any physical blow. "Still mopping floors for the rich and famous." From the hospital bed, Thorne wheezed, his voice a ragged whisper. "Vance, he works for them." My eyes darted around the room, a frantic inventory of threats. 3 guards, hulking figures in black suits, blocked the only exit. Lena stood frozen by the wall of monitors, her face a mask of disbelief and fear. Dr. Eris clutched his jaw, blood seeping between his fingers where Vance must have struck him. "Them?" I asked, my voice tight. "Who's them?" Vance sneered, the expression twisting his handsome features into something ugly. The real enemy, Jack. The ones who are tired of playing by the rules. Thorn's little empire is crumbling, and he doesn't even see it coming. He leaned in closer, his breath hot against my ear. And you, Jack, you're the perfect patsy. For what? My muscles coiled, every fiber of my being screaming for action. For murdering a billionaire philanthropist in his hospital bed, Vance said, his tone chillingly casual. At his subtle nod, his men began to fan out, their guns trained not on me, but on Thorn. One of them pulled a set of zip ties from his belt, his intentions brutally clear. They were here to execute Thorn and frame me for it. That was the moment the world slowed down. The beeping of the heart monitor, the sterile smell of the room, the glint of light on polished gun barrels had all faded into the background. There was only the threat, and the need to neutralize it. I moved, fast as a desert wind, kicking up sand. My elbow smashed into Vance's gun hand with a force that sent a shockwave up my arm. The pistol clattered to the floor, skittering uselessly under the bed. In the same fluid motion, I drove my heel backward, directly into the knee of the guard behind me. I heard the sickening crack of bone, a sound that would have made me wince on any other day. Today, it was just a problem solved. He crumpled with a strangled cry. Another guard swung a fist the size of a cinder block at my head. I ducked under the clumsy attack, my hand closing around the cool metal of the four-pole next to me. I ripped it from its stand, the bag of saline solution swinging wildly. Spinning it like a staff, I brought the heavy base around in a wide arc, metal connected with jaw. The third guard dropped like a sack of rocks, out cold before he hit the floor. But Vance was a professional. He'd recovered from the initial shock, and now a combat knife gleamed in his hand as he lunged. I didn't back away. I stepped into the attack, my hand catching his wrist, fingers digging into the pressure points I knew so well. I twisted, hard. Vance screamed, a high-pitched ugly sound that was utterly unlike the commanding officer I once knew. The knife fell from his numb fingers. I didn't give him a second to think. I slammed him against the wall, my forearm pressed against his throat. The last guard, the one with the zip ties, was recovering, raising his pistol, but he never got the chance to aim. I saw a flash of movement out of the corner of my eye. Lena Shadi snatched a syringe from a medical tray and throwed it with the precision of a dart player. It embedded itself in the guard's neck. His eyes went wide with surprise, then rolled back in his head as he collapsed in a heap. Silence descended, broken only by Vance's ragged, panicked gasps for air and the steady, weak beep of Thorn's heart monitor. I picked up Vance's fallen knife and pressed the cold, sharp edge against his throat, just enough to draw a single drop of blood. "Who sent you?" I demanded, my voice a low growl. Vance just spat a mouthful of blood and saliva onto the floor. "You think this is over? You'll never make it to the gala. You have no idea what's coming." I glanced over at Thorn. The billionaire was struggling to sit up, his face pale and slick with sweat, but his eyes were sharp, alight with a desperate urgency. He gave me a weak, almost imperceptible nod. "Do it, Jack." The message was clear. Information was a luxury we couldn't afford right now. Survival was everything. My blade drew a thin red line on Vance's throat, a silent promise. His bravado finally cracked, his eyes darting frantically towards the door. "Reinforcements, they're coming." As if on cue, I heard it. The heavy rhythmic thud of combat boots pounding down the hallway. At least half a dozen men, moving fast. I yanked Vance up, hooking my arm around his neck and pulling him in front of me. A human shield of questionable value, but my only option. I held the knife tight against his ribs. Thorn pushed himself up further, his voice gaining a sliver of its old command. "Get me to the gala, Jack. The drive, it's in my pocket. Everything is on it. If they get it, we lose. If we get it there, we have a chance. Get me to the gala, or we all die here." The door to the hospital room burst open, splintering off its hinges. The doorway filled with more black suits, more guns, all pointing our way. I tightened my grip on Vance, feeling the frantic hammering of his heart against my arm. "We're leaving," I shouted over the sudden chaos. Now, sirens wailed in the distance, a mournful song of the city's underbelly. Jack didn't hesitate. He shoved Vance, the sniveling informant, hard toward the window. "Third floor drop. Think you can make it?" Vance paled, but Thorn, slumped against the wall, gritted his teeth. "I can move." His voice was a strained whisper, but the steel was still there. Lena, ever the pragmatist, was already on her feet, grabbing her medical bag. The precious vials of antidote clinked inside, a fragile promise of survival. Just then, Dr. Eris, his face a mask of panic and determination, stumbled up the last few stairs. "I'll drive," he gasped, his car keys jingling in his trembling hand. There was no time for discussion. With a powerful kick, Jack shattered the window, sending a shower of glass raining down onto the dark alley below. Vance screamed, a high-pitched, terrified sound, as Jack unceremoniously threw him out into the night. Thorn, with a surge of adrenaline, managed to get to his feet and followed, launching himself through the shattered frame. Jack was right behind him, catching his arm midair, trying to absorb some of the impact. They hit the ground hard, a bone-jarring thud that echoed off the brick walls. Lena, nimble and quick, jumped next, landing with a practiced roll. Dr. Eris, less graceful but just as desperate, landed beside her with a heavy groan. 4 of them, fugitives against a sprawling, indifferent city. The momentary relief was shattered by the sudden glare of headlights spearing through the darkness. A convoy of black SUVs, sleek and menacing, screeched to a halt, blocking the alley's exit. The night erupted in a staccato crackle of gunfire. Bullets sparked off the pavement, ricocheting with angry whines. "Move!" Jack yelled, dragging the dazed Thorne behind the relative safety of a parked ambulance. Lena was already at Thorne's side, pressing thick bandages to a wound on his neck. Blood, dark and slick, was already soaking through. "He's fading, Jack," she said, her voice tight with urgency. Thorne's skin was taking on a ghastly gray pallor. His breathing was shallow, his chest barely moving. The Nirox was burning through him, a silent fire consuming him from the inside out. With a snarl, Jack ripped open Thorne's shirt. The poison was winning. The antidote. Lena fumbled in her bag, her hands shaking as she pulled out the last remaining vial. She thrust it into Jack's hand. There was no time for subtlety, no time for finding a vein. Jack plunged the needle directly into Thorne's chest. A desperate, brutal move, aiming for the heart. Thorne's body arched violently off the ground, a strangled, gurgling sound escaping his lips. Then, a terrifying stillness. Lena's fingers flew to his neck. No pulse. Panic flared in her eyes. Jack didn't waste a second. He started CPR, his hands a blur of motion on Thorne's still chest. 1.2.3. He pushed, again and again, pouring his own life force into the man he swore to protect. Suddenly, Thorne's body jolted. A powerful, convulsive tremor. A flush of color, faint but undeniable, returned to his cheeks. Lena checked again. "I've got a weak heartbeat. He's back." Just then, Dr. Eris's sedan screeched to a halt at the mouth of the alley. "Get in, now," he screamed over the engine's roar. Jack didn't need to be told twice. He scooped Thorne up, the man surprisingly heavy, and bundled him into the back seat. Lena climbed in right beside him, her medical bag clutched to her chest. Dr. Eris floored the gas pedal. The tires smoked, screaming in protest as the sedan launched forward. The rear window exploded inward, a spiderweb of cracks followed by a shower of glass, as bullets hailed down on them. Jack, finding Vance's discarded pistol on the floor, returned fire, aiming for the tires of the lead SUV. A lucky shot, or maybe just desperate aim, sent 2 of the pursuing vehicles spinning out of control. Dr. Eris swerved into the chaotic flow of late-night traffic, using other cars as moving shields. Thorne's head lolled on the seat, his eyes closed. Lena was frantically trying to stabilize him. "The gala starts in 90 minutes. Jack," she said, her voice strained. "He's not going to make it. He's dying again." Jack grabbed Thorne's wrist, searching for a pulse. It was there, but faint, as delicate and fleeting as a moth's wing against his fingertips. And then, the impossible happened. Thorne's eyes snapped open. They weren't glazed or unfocused. They were sharp, intelligent, and filled with a chilling purpose. His hand, weak but steady, lifted and pointed directly at the dashboard. The GPS screen glowed with an pre-entered destination. Thorne's own mansion, the very site of the gala. A sudden, dawning realization hit Jack like a physical blow. This wasn't a desperate escape. This was a calculated move. Thorne had been planning this the entire time. The capture, the poison, the escape, it was all part of a larger, more intricate scheme. He hadn't been a victim. He had been the architect. The sedan raced on, a silver streak against the glittering, deceptive skyline of the city, and behind them, the headlights of their pursuers reformed, closing the distance, like the glowing eyes of predators moving in for the final kill. The real game was just beginning. The sedan screamed into Thorne's private tunnel. The heavy garage door's ceiling shut behind them with a final, booming thud. The sudden silence was as heavy as stone, broken only by the ragged sound of breathing. Dr. Eris slumped over the steering wheel, completely spent. I immediately turned to Thorne in the back seat. Lena, his personal medic, was already there, her fingers pressed against his neck, her face a mask of concentration. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with fear. "His pulse is fading. It's fading fast." There was no time to waste. I scooped Thorne into my arms. He was lighter than I expected, a dead weight. My feet echoed on the cold marble floors of the mansion as I carried him through the grand foyer. It felt like walking through a mausoleum. We burst into Thorne's bedroom, and I was stunned. It looked less like a bedroom and more like a high-tech hospital ward. Monitors and machines lined the walls, their screens dark for now, for stands stood like silent sentinels. Lena was a blur of motion, her professionalism taking over. Why me? Thorn struggled to speak, each word an effort. You're the only one who can stop them. He was hit by another wave of coughing, this time more violent. Blood splattered onto the pristine white sheets. My daughter, he choked out, his eyes pleading with me. She's their hostage. My blood ran cold. I froze, the implications of his words crashing down on me. Thorn's daughter, where I demanded. Where is she? His breath hitched. The Gala Vance, ... My head of security, ... He works for Silas Crow. The name hit me like a physical blow. Crow, Thorn's biggest rival, a ruthless businessman known for his complete lack of morals. Crow plans to auction my technology, Thorn continued, his voice growing weaker, and he's going to frame you. For my murder. I stood up straight, my mind racing, trying to piece it all together. The trap wasn't just for Thorn, it was for me, too. I walked to the massive window, staring out at the city lights twinkling below like a sea of distant stars. It was a beautiful, deceptive sight, and then I saw them. Tiny red dots, dancing across the room. They settled on Thorn's chest. Snipers, get down! I roared, tackling Lena and pulling her to the floor just as the first shot rang out. The massive window didn't just crack. It exploded inwards, a shower of razor-sharp glass raining down on us. Dr. Eris, who had just entered the room, screamed and dropped flat. I rolled behind the heavy oak bed, pulling Lena with me, the sound of automatic gunfire ripping the room to shreds. Plaster, wood, and fabric were torn apart. Thorn gasped from the bed. The antidote, he wheezed, it's of not working. Lena crawled on her hands and knees, toward the monitors, ignoring the flying debris. The screens were a symphony of disaster. His vitals are crashing. She yelled over the chaos. The Noi rocks, ... It must have mutated. The antidote isn't binding to it. I scrambled to Thorn's side. Ripping open his shirt, I recoiled in horror. His chest was a terrifying roadmap of black, swollen veins, spreading like a spider's web from the injection site. This wasn't just poison. It was something alive, something consuming him from the inside. My mind flashed back to a mission in the Amazon, a rare plant-based toxin that acted in a similar way. There was only one way to stop it. I spotted a medical tray nearby and grabbed a scalpel. Lena saw what I was about to do and lunged, grabbing my arm. What are you doing? You'll kill him. Her eyes were wide with panic. I know how to drain it, I said, my voice grim. It's the only way. I shook her off. There was no time to explain, no time to argue. I found the largest, most prominent vein, near his heart, took a deep breath, and made a precise, shallow cut. Black, viscous blood sprayed out, splattering my face. It was thick, almost like oil. Thorn's body arched in agony, a silent scream on his lips as he writhed on the bed. Hold him down, I yelled at Eris. I squeezed the area around the wound, forcing more of the poisoned blood out. It flowed sluggishly, a dark tide of death. Lena, realizing what I was doing, quickly grabbed a handful of gauze and pressed it around the incision, trying to control the bleeding while letting the poison drain. Slowly, agonizingly, Thorn's violent thrashing began to subside. His breathing, which had been ragged and shallow, started to even out. A hint of natural color returned to his face. It seemed to be working. But then, the worst possible sound filled the room. A long, continuous, high-pitched beep. I looked at the monitor. A flat line, no pulse. Lena cried out. I didn't hesitate. I pushed her aside and started chest compressions. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, ... I counted, putting all my weight and strength into each push. Hard, fast. Thorn's body lifted off the bed with each compression. Blood, now more red than black, bubbled from his mouth, but the monitor remained flat. Come on, Thorn, I grunted, sweat pouring down my face. Don't you die on me? I leaned back, about to start again, when I stopped. Thorn's eyes were open, not just fluttering, but open. He looked at me, and a weak, faint smile touched his lips. He took a shallow, shaky breath. You, ... Did it? He whispered. The relief was so immense, it almost brought me to my knees. He was alive, but as I looked from his face to the shattered window, I knew this was far from over. Crow had his daughter. He had the gala, and he was waiting for me. The fight had just begun. The first rays of dawn painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, a stark contrast to the chaos of the night. I stood on the edge of the skyscraper's roof, the cool morning breeze, a welcome relief against my skin. Below, on the helipad, Silas Crow's body was a motionless silhouette against the rising sun. His reign of terror was over. Across the roof, I saw Lena, her movements precise and efficient as she secured the last of the surrendered auctioneers. The distant wail of sirens grew steadily louder, a symphony of order returning to a city that had been on the brink of collapse. It was a sound I'd grown accustomed to, the official announcement that my part was done. Just as I turned to leave, a small voice called my name. Jack. I looked down to see Thorn's daughter, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and gratitude. Dad wants to thank you, she said, her voice barely a whisper. She took my hand, her small fingers wrapping around mine, and led me away from the edge, back towards the penthouse entrance. The interior of the penthouse was a mess, a testament to the brutal fight that had taken place. Furniture was overturned, glass was shattered, but the chaos seemed to be receding, replaced by a quiet calm. She led me to a bedroom where Thorn was propped up in bed, looking pale and weak, but with a triumphant smile on his face. "You saved us all, Jack," he said, his voice raspy but firm. "The tech. It's safe. My life's work is safe because of you." I just nodded, feeling the familiar weight of a completed mission settle on my shoulders. "Just doing my job, sir," I replied. It was the standard response, the one that kept a professional distance. The one that reminded me that this wasn't my life, just a chapter in it. But Thorn shook his head, a flicker of something more in his eyes. "No," he insisted, "you did more than a job. You took a stand when no one else would. You brought hope back to this city, and for that, I want you to have it." I stared at him, trying to process his words. "Have what, sir?" He gestured weakly towards a secure vault in the corner of the room. "Protect the energy source. It belongs to you now, Jack, it's yours." My mind reeled. The technology we had just fought and nearly died for was revolutionary. It could power entire cities, change the world. It was worth billions, maybe trillions, and he was just giving it to me. I shook my head, taking a step back. "I'm a soldier, sir, not a businessman. I wouldn't know the first thing to do with it. My world was one of tactics and threats, not boardrooms and balance sheets." Thorn let out a weak laugh, which turned into a cough. "Then find someone who is," he said, catching his breath. He glanced over at Lena, who had quietly entered the room and was now standing by his bedside. "She's been running my labs for years. She knows the technology better than I do." I looked at Lena. Her expression was calm, confident. A small, knowing smile played on her lips. "I'd be honored, Jack," she said. Her voice was steady, a stark contrast to the whirlwind of thoughts in my head. Could this work? Could we actually manage something so monumental? Before I could even formulate a response, the fragile peace of the morning was shattered. Bright red lights flashed throughout the penthouse, and a jarring alarm blared to life once more. The door burst open, and a team of Thorn's personal security guards rushed in, weapons drawn. "Mr. Thorn, we have a problem," one of them shouted over the noise. "Our intel shows Crow's remaining forces are regrouping. They're planning a counterattack on several key city infrastructure points." My instincts kicked in. My mission wasn't over. But as I turned to Thorn, ready to plan his immediate evacuation, I saw something astonishing. He was pushing himself out of bed, standing on his own 2 feet. The weakness seemed to have vanished, replaced by a surge of raw determination. He looked stronger, more powerful than I had ever seen him. "Let them come," he said, his voice booming with newfound strength. I moved instinctively to the massive window, my eyes scanning the streets below. The sun was higher now, its light pushing back the last of the shadows, revealing the true scale of the city. "Sir, with all due respect, we need to get you to a secure location. Now," I urged. This wasn't the time for bravado. But Thorn just shook his head, a resolute look on his face. "No, this ends now. Not with guns, not with soldiers, but with this." He walked over to his desk and picked up a small, sleek remote control. He pressed a single button. In an instant, the city transformed. Every screen, from the massive billboards in the central square to the personal devices in people's hands, flickered to life. And on every single one, Thorn's face appeared. His voice, clear and powerful, echoed from a million speakers at once. "People of this city," he began, his image towering over the streets. "My name is Arthur Thorn. Tonight, we were attacked, but tonight, we fought back. I am here to tell you that Silas Grow is dead." A collective gasp seemed to rise from the city itself. His criminal empire falls with him. The technology he stole, the power he sought to control. It now belongs to you. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "From this moment on, the advanced energy technology developed by Thorn Industries is free. It is for everyone. It will power your homes, your businesses, your future. It is a gift to all of you." Down on the streets, I could see the effect his words were having. Crow's men, the ones who were supposedly regrouping for an attack, stopped in their tracks. They looked at the screens, then at each other, confusion turning to realization. Their cause was gone. Their leader was dead. The prize they were fighting for was now worthless to them. One by one, they dropped their weapons and began to scatter, melting back into the city they had tried to conquer. Thorn turned away from the screens, his gaze finding mine. "You taught me something important tonight, soldier," he said, his voice softer now. "Sometimes, the best rescue mission isn't about saving one person. It's about giving everyone a reason to hope." It was a lesson I hadn't intended to teach, but he was right. I had focused on the tactical objective, on neutralizing the threat. Thorn had seen the bigger picture. He understood that true victory wasn't just about defeating an enemy, but about inspiring the people. I stood straighter, a feeling of immense respect washing over me, and gave him the only response that felt appropriate. A sharp, clean salute. His daughter ran to him then, and he swept her up into a hug, holding her tight. It was a picture of a family reunited, of a future secured. As I watched them, Lena came to my side and gently took my hand. Her touch was warm, grounding. "What now?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. I looked past her, out the window, at the city below. The rising sun was bathing the skyscrapers in a brilliant, golden light. The sirens had faded, replaced by the gentle hum of a city waking up, a city with a new future. "Now," I said, a smile finally breaking across my face, "we rebuild." The glow of the new day filled the room, a promise of what was to come. Mission complete.